Hello, and welcome to Galen Data's Medical Device Connectivity Innovation Webinar Series. My name is Keith Drake. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Galen Data. Our topic today is connected medical devices, understanding challenges and risks. Our presenter today is Abbas Dhilawala. He is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Galen Data. He's got a wide range of experience, couple decades of software development, including 13 years in healthcare, medical devices, developing solutions for clients in the US, the European Union, Canada, and Asia. The focus of his professional career has been on mobile computing, cloud connectivity, web development, and sensors. Now let's talk about our presentation today. As most of you know, the growth of the Internet of Medical Things, the IoMT, shows us that connecting devices and collecting data is critical to user acceptance and commercial success. However, today, a lot of medical device manufacturers are faced with a myriad of challenges when connecting their devices with cloud technology. These risks and challenges include obvious technical challenges, compliance and regulatory issues. The parenthetical statement there is the cloud becomes part of your medical device, and that must be considered. Privacy and security concerns, and then finally, operational and scalability matters. The cost of design, development, testing, and implementation and maintenance is also a key consideration. So today's webinar will present a cost-effective and time-efficient approach for medical device manufacturers to overcome these issues. Now, some logistics here. You can submit your questions, your Q&A session questions that we'll have at the end of the webinar. You can submit them at any time in the questions window in your GoToWebinar console. If we don't get to your questions during the Q&A session, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Please contact us at any time if we can be of any help, giving advice, guidance, or specifically helping you address your connectivity needs. A handout with an overview of Galen Data is available now in your GoToWebinar console. You can download that at any time. And then finally, a recording of the webinar will be provided to all attendees via email. So with that, we're going to dive right in. It's my pleasure to welcome to the webinar the CTO and co-founder of Galen Data, Abbas Dhilawala. Abbas, I will hand the screen over to you.
Thank you, Keith. I'm assuming everybody can hear me properly. So I want to start with talking about some of the benefits that connected health brings. I will highlight four major ones. There are many, but the four major ones I want to highlight today. The first one that we want to talk about is the remote monitoring. So I want to start with that because it's obvious in the current situation how remote monitoring can be very helpful. So if your device is connected, it can be very well suited for telehealth options, for example. Telehealth options. So again, having connectivity there, if you already had connectivity, it's very easy to deploy these kind of devices right now into an area where there's a greater need. We also want to understand patient compliance. So that's another reason to kind of do remote monitoring is to figure out if the patient is complying with either the therapy or the follow-ups and stuff like that. So one of our clients actually did this exact same thing. They have a device that's in a space that requires patient compliance to gain full reimbursement from insurance or CMS. And the reimbursement again happens, that particular patient uses a certain amount of time in that week. So tracking and reporting that kind of metrics at scale, if you do it manually, is very, very costly and very prohibitive. So they have no choice but to figure out a way to use cloud connectivity. Also, connectivity allows them to monitor the patient and intervene early if the patient is not using the device as prescribed. So again, you kind of prevent some of the compliance issues there. Another major benefit of connectivity can be higher reimbursement in some cases. For example, if you have better, if you can prove to the insurance company that your device or your has better efficacy, for example, and you can do that through real world data. So when you have it in the patient's hand or in the doctor's hand and they use it and you collect that data, you can go back to the insurance and ask for better coverage. So that's one option. Alternatively, you can also look into alternative use cases. So FDA, for example, has a pilot program right now called NEST. What it does is allows you to use real world evidence, as described, which is data in the field, to expand your indications for use. So if you have primary indications of use of something and you suspect that there's alternative or secondary indications of use, the traditional route is to essentially go through a full clinical study to get that particular indication of use approved as well. With this pilot program, you can do that while the patients are using your devices for the approved use cases. So that's another very cost-effective way to kind of get additional coverage. Connectivity can also open up new business models, such as diagnosis as a service. So in this case, either you have diagnosis kits, specifically home diagnosis kits. A good example is some of the COVID at-home diagnosis kits that are going out. But essentially, instead of the traditional model where a patient comes in the lab takes the sample, runs through a diagnosis, you basically, and diagnosis that's done in the lab itself or in the doctor's office, you essentially move that collection at the patient's home. You use technologies like your smartphone and other things to kind of move some of the samples, like if there's image-based samples, for example, back into the cloud where the algorithm could be running, and that algorithm could be doing some of that diagnosis. We have some customers who already use this model, where they, in this case, they are still lab-driven, but the standard lab or clinical instruments produce data, and the data is then moved to the cloud where the algorithms are being used to create the diagnostic reports or results, and then they're sent back to either the clinicians or patients or the laboratory back. So you can kind of use that as a different service model than the traditional service model you have with the basic devices in the field. Also, there's a different use case or different kind of business model that's going more and more kind of mainstream is device as a service. So traditionally, again, devices are sold to healthcare systems, some of them at a very high price point, and it's not always an easy sale to do. In this particular model, you essentially, instead of selling the device, you're leasing the device, and you're charging them per use, similar to how you often use some of the software these days. The benefits there is you get a more recurring revenue option, and also it becomes a little bit easier for the hospital systems or healthcare systems to kind of take on that particular device because of the cost is spread across many years or many months. So that's again things that can be opened up if you have connectivity in your devices. Another thing I want to talk about is essentially device surveillance. So connectivity can be useful to your engineering teams as well. If your device is connected, you can keep an eye on the device health remotely, and you can even do predictive maintenance on it if possible. Similarly, if there's an issue in the field, your engineers can essentially get access to that data without having to go down and collect that data, and they can diagnose a lot of those issues without even needing the device back. The same things can happen with if there's a complaint in the field, for example. Your quality team can capture some of that data that gives them context of what the complaint is about. Also, very important, you can use, if you have connectivity, you can also do over-the-air updates to keep your device and your firmware on the device and your entire device fleet secure and enhance the functionality out in the field as you go. So while we saw the benefits, everything comes with challenges. So there are two major categories of challenges I want to talk about that connectivity brings. One is risks posed by connectivity implementations, such as cybersecurity risks, regulatory risks, financial and technical risks, and also, as Keith alluded, the cost of both the developing a solution that's connected and then maintaining that solution as you deploy it. So let's talk one at a time. First, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. So security challenges are well known. There's virtually at least one healthcare data breach a day. Some are well publicized. There was an attack a couple of years ago on the national health system in UK called the WannaCry malware. which was well publicized, had a lot of patient records being affected. There was one at the Children's Hospital in Boston. That was also well publicized. There's also breaches that are well known, not breaches, vulnerabilities that are well known. They never were breached, but there were vulnerabilities in devices that required, in some cases, FDA recalls. We had one on Medtronic last year. I think there was a St. Jude ICVs a few years before that. But there were 572 security breaches in 2019. 300 of those were due to active hacking. So it's not these are not just somebody leaving the information out there. It's actively somebody seeking out. That is up 37% from 2018, roughly affecting about 37 million patient records, which is another almost a 2x from 2018. So lots of potential exposure. The top risks generally loss of data, which we'll talk about what risks they bring additionally. Loss of system availability, so your devices or your systems can be offline. That may affect patients' health. And then hacked devices, so you may lose control of your devices and they'll be doing things you don't want it to do. Most at-risk information generally is, and this is based on kind of the black market value of these kind of information. So name and addresses, social security numbers, biometric data, diagnostic data, specifically diagnostic images, are high value. So if you have those kind of data, cybersecurity risks are pretty high. Next, I want to talk about is the regulatory challenges that you get once you connect, once you decide to have the cloud connectivity. The question is, how do you deal with the cloud? Is the cloud an accessory to your device, or is it a medical device data system, or is it a clinical decision system? So all that questions come up and you have to kind of deal with it. Adding additional things in your offering obviously can delay your regulatory filing. So go-to-market strategies can be impacted by making a decision on what to do with the cloud. And the last is, you get more regulatory coverage. So while your cloud itself might require an FDA or some kind of regulatory approval, you also have other regulatory standards or laws that you have to comply with if you start collecting data, such as, you have to make sure you manage all the cybersecurity rules. You get, if you collect data, you now subject to HIPAA rules. And some, if you're selling in European Union, or if you're selling to a European Union citizen, you get affected by GDPR. Similarly, the California's privacy law that went into effect January of this year, and then some other ones. The California has some very stringent laws as well. So you get essentially exposed to some of these regulatory coverages as well. The third kind of risk is the financial risk. So that's a combination of fines. So if you have breaches, fines can be significant. These are some examples. Under HIPAA, you can get $50,000 per incident. GDPR is even worse because it either says 4% of your annual revenue or 20 million euros, whichever is higher per incident. So it's a pretty hefty fine if you fall into the bad side of the laws. And then similarly, CCPA has $7,500 per incident, and then $750 for every user that's affected. So again, they can quickly ramp up. You also may be exposed to liabilities from the customer, whether that be health systems or patients directly, from any kind of data loss or data access issues. And then obviously you have reputational harm. Anytime you get a news for the bad reasons, that's just not good for business. So there's significant financial impact on the decision to make choice of connectivity. And last is the technical challenges. Anytime you do development, there's always risks. You could have potential schedule delays. Engineering projects don't always go as planned, so resulting in quite a bit of schedule delays. You may have defects that come up that require fixing, and that can delay schedule or delay go-to-market. Usability challenges. Anytime you build new things, you have to figure out how it fits in the workflow, how the user is going to use it, or additional risks your new set of systems or new set of functions bring in terms of usability challenges. And then last is the kind of the talent availability or readiness. So even in the current situation where we see a lot of jobs being impacted, that talent that understands medical device software, that understands cloud aspects to it, security aspects to it, is not always available easily, and they're generally in high demand. So that is a additional risk you have, is not being able to get this project up and going. Let's talk about cost. So costs can add up quickly. In my 12 plus years experience doing cloud development for medical devices, the average cost of development, initial development, is roughly around $250,000 to $750,000. That will depend on many things on what the technical features you need from the system. So that's kind of a range, but some of the costs are driven by the fact that you need additional requirements for cybersecurity and privacy mitigations, as well as your regulatory kind of compliance documentation and processes around that. And so that's one-time kind of initial cost, which is already significant. But on top of that, you have the cost of maintenance. Again, in my experience, and depending on the scope of the project, it's roughly around $100,000 to $300,000 a year. And that includes, the cost of the infrastructure, like servers, storage, bandwidth, backups of data, your development team that is maintaining that product, because as you deploy stuff will show up. There'll be defects, there'll be a request for new features. You got to keep maintaining that if you want a good user experience. And then the IT kind of management, cybersecurity monitoring, disaster recovery, patching your servers, making sure everything's running properly. All that cost can quickly be a overwhelming amount of your budget for the cloud connectivity. So as we see, there's benefits, and some of them are quite big, but there are significant challenges or risks around that. So how do we reduce the risk and try to manage or maximize the benefits, right? So we'll start with one at a time. So let's talk about some of the security management. So how do you manage security and privacy? The first step you generally do is around trying to do a risk assessment. So that's how we do medical device software or medical device development in general, is we start with the risk and we figure out what harm a particular technology or device or software can bring to the user. We similarly do a risk assessment for the cybersecurity aspect to it. If step one is generally what we call threat modeling. So essentially you figure out what your threats are, what are the how those threats can manifest within your system, what are your weak points in your system, and how do you what are the likelihoods of those weaker points be exploited. So you kind of do a similar kind of FAMIA style risk assessment in terms of your failure modes, potential failure modes, your effects they can have, and your probabilities and severities around that. There's different ways of doing that. There is a framework available from the National Institute of Cybersecurity, National Institute of Standard and Technology, called Cybersecurity Framework. And that framework allows you or has some ways to do some kind of threat modeling. So that's what you start with, threat modeling. The next thing you do is you want to establish a culture of cybersecurity. This is super important. A lot of the companies treat cybersecurity as a kind of an add-on. They build the devices, they build the solutions, and say, oh, now you have to worry about security. That's the wrong approach. You need to make sure that cybersecurity is part of your company culture, your development culture. You treat your security management practices as part of your development process, for example, just like you will deal with any other thing. So just like you have functional requirements, you have security requirements upfront. Just like you would do functional testing, you do cybersecurity testing. You do secure coding if you're going to kind of work through that entire development process, keeping security in mind. We also train your workforce specifically, and maybe even your users. And the reason for that is, a lot of the cybersecurity issues come with people. Even if you have very good controls in your software or in your solution, you may still have people leaving out pieces of information, or sharing access and stuff like that, which can lead to or clicking on links and stuff like that. So it's very important to train your workforce and train them repeatedly. And that I cannot emphasize that enough. That training is a super important aspect to keeping the cybersecurity culture in your company. Add controls in the product, so make sure you have strong password management, for example. Things like complexity of the password, or how often it needs to be changed, how frequently you can reuse passwords, things like that. Now there's some usability challenges around that. So the more complex you make passwords, the harder it becomes the user to remember. More likely they will write it down and share or use a very simple, same passwords across. So you have to kind of put a balance around that. A thing that people do nowadays is to potentially use a second factor. So a kind of multi-factor authentication. You see that in banks. Many times you will get a code on your email or your text, or you can use some of the apps that allow you to give us an extra token or extra code that simplifies the requirement for passwords, but that prevents some of the potential problems because we're using two different factors for authentication. And then encrypt, 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 and encrypt, encrypt everywhere. Encrypt when you transmit information over the network, even if it's your internal network. Assume that everything is insecure. So you always encrypt in transmission, you encrypt in storage. If you're storing on your device, encrypt it there. If you're storing it on your cloud, encrypt it there. If you're storing somewhere else, make sure there's an encryption. Encryption can again have usability challenges, but that's something we have to deal with. And there's engineering solutions around that can kind of do encryption and kind of the back layer while not affecting usability. So that's important to have. Monitor your deployments. So make sure you have your tools deployed that will monitor your cloud infrastructure. Things like an analysis of logs, for example, patching. So you have to make sure you patch your servers, your devices pretty often. You can subscribe to databases, like there's the CVE, which is the Common Vulnerability databases. That will tell you what other things have been found, and you can kind of figure out if that affects your system based on underlying components. So you kind of want to make sure that you do surveillance, just like you do surveillance on your devices for the risks. You do surveillance on your digital health, kind of your cloud platform as well. And then develop an incident response plan. So what does that mean? If there's an incident, and you'd always assume there'll be one, because the chances of one happening are there. So you always want to have a response plan upfront, and you want to train on that plan quite often. So again, you can start with the cybersecurity framework from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have a kind of a framework defined on what should be part of a response plan. But things like identifying who's responsible for what aspect of the response when something like this happens. So you want to understand how will you identify which devices or systems are affected. How would you isolate those systems as quickly as possible so that you can mitigate and contain some of those risks? You also want to make sure you have a cross-functional team as part of your response team, so that you are looking at both not just from engineering aspects, but also from your risk and your quality and your management aspects as well. So you have those teams, you figure out timelines that will require you to come and fix an underlying response, or workarounds that can be done while you're fixing the underlying issues. And then how would you identify which patients or which users are affected by that particular incident, if there are any? And how would you kind of do notifications? Notifications to users and in some cases government bodies are required by some of the privacy laws like GDPR or CCPA. So you want to make sure that you understand all that stuff. And again, as I said, you run simulations, so you be prepared, because when it happens, it's a lot. You don't want to say dust off your response plan when the actual incident is happening. And then set up appropriate agreements. This is specifically for US or US entities, because this is under HIPAA law, but you want to have a business associate agreement with any third parties that may need data access. So that may be your providers, your cloud providers. So if you're hosting this, let's say your cloud solution on AWS, then you need a BA with AWS. If you're using a third party, to kind of maintain that, you need a BA with a third party. So make sure you have that in place, because that again identifies the responsibilities and puts some of the responsibility that you have, still keeps it on you, but also puts the same set of responsibilities and liabilities on the third party that you're working with as well. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of managing the regulatory risks, right? So how do you deal with the regulatory aspect of cloud connectivity? How do you make the cloud part of your medical device? So the first thing that I generally tell people is build as much as possible with design controls upfront, even if it's not fully regulated. Design controls aren't necessarily something that somebody just came up with in their nightmare. These are best engineering practices, so you do them regardless. I mean, you do design inputs for anything because that helps you build a good product. You test them, you do risk analysis. So a lot of those, what's part of design controls are just good engineering practices. Just do them and document them, take credit for them, because it's going to give you a good product regardless. Whether you go to the FDA or other regulatory bodies for approval of that particular aspect is immaterial to just building it the right way. So do that as much as possible. Determine if your cloud solution can fall under either the NDDS or the CDS umbrella. And this is again for FDA. There are similar aspects to if you want to do CE marks and the European NDRs around that. But there are benefits of doing that kind of stuff. One is you don't need the same kind of approval process if your cloud can fall under NDDS, even if your device is not. If your device could be a class 2, require a standard of 510K, you may be able to put your cloud under an MDDS umbrella. There are shortcomings to that as well. For example, on MDDS, you can only make a cloud solution or any solution on MDDS if you don't do any data interpretation. So if you're just taking data in, maybe displaying it as is, raw data, and then all transferring the data somewhere else, then that's essentially an MDDS. You have similar restrictions with CDS, but they can be benefit if you can fall within that zone. They can be very helpful. And then the third option is to build upon something that's already compliant. So instead of building everything from scratch, start with something that's already built and already compliant. That kind of at least gives you halfway or 75% of the way there for your solution to be completely compliant. So that's kind of ways to manage some of these risks around regulatory issues. Financial and cost overrun. So again, how do you manage the fines aspect or the aspect of technical development taking much longer or much more costlier than you anticipated or your budget allowed? So again, partner with an experienced firm if you can, or get a very experienced development team in-house so that you're not doing a lot of discovery while you're building this. That's something that they have figured out, they've already known. There's always going to be nuances to every implementation, but a lot of this is can be figured out upfront. So having an experienced team, whether it's in-house or third party, is the key to kind of managing that cost overruns in terms of development and future issues. Again, development stages, that could be another aspect, another way to control your cost. When you go into product development, sometimes you want to build the best thing out there. A lot of time that's not the right approach. So try to build in small stages, go do one thing or two things the system does, go out of the market, get feedback, and then iterate upon. I've been burned in my prior life by trying to do too much and never getting to market and having a competition consistently take over. So this is a lesson learned kind of in a very harsh way for me, is to make sure you try to develop in stages, figure out your MVP that you need, and then go to market with that, and then come back and iterate. Software is a little easier to iterate than hardware is, so software solutions in the cloud are generally better to do an iterative stage. Again, build upon an existing solution, which also helps with, while it also helps with your cost overruns because you are now building less of it. It takes away some of the technical risk, but it can also help you get quickly to market, which is itself is a good thing. And look for a managed solution. So if you build everything in-house or build with a partner, you still have to run the whole deployment. So you may still have to go to AWS or Azure or some of the cloud providers. And that's great because they have a very good infrastructure kind of deployment model, but they don't provide full management. They do, they just provide you the servers, the infrastructure. You sort of do the management. You have to do the cybersecurity aspects to it. You have to make sure the deployment's up and running. You have to do the backups. There's a lot of stuff you still are reliant on your own expertise or abilities to manage. So, but there are ways to, there are other solutions out there that can be fully managed. So you put the burden on a third party completely, and that way allows you to kind of keep a fixed cost in that aspect. So now that I told you a few things about us or about what to do, I just want to kind of highlight a few other aspects around who we are and how can we help in this endeavor of your cloud connectivity. So we are a cloud platform that is purpose-built for medical device. What that means is we started with the requirements of healthcare in general, medical device in particular, understand the data models, understand how business happens, and understand the regulatory challenges, and build a infrastructure and a kind of a platform that is suitable for that kind of deployment. That includes being a device agnostic interface. So you can use any kind of devices, whether it be a smartphone app or a traditional medical devices or a wearable, and be able to interact with the cloud using our APIs. On the cloud side, we do all the management for you. It's a fully managed solution. That means, we store the data, we do all the security compliance, we do all the management of that. We provide you with tools to manage access controls. You determine who has access to what. You can do analysis, you can do visualization within our tool through the web portals that are available on different platforms, whether it be PCs or phones or tablets. And we built everything under design controls, and we comply to HIPAA and GDPR and CCPA and stuff like that. We are ISO certified, so that part of our QMS system is already available, already in place, and all of our design, development, and operation happens within those QMS systems. Some of the features that we provide are quick integrations with our kind of APIs. We provide for things like authentication. So you don't have to build out an authentication scheme. You can use our authentication that includes, simple username, password, multi-factor authentication options and stuff like that. Patient management, user management, kind of practices or clinic management, all that is available as API. So you can kind of leverage a lot of those features that you don't have to build on your own. Flexible data workflows, so you can kind of figure out how data will flow in and out of the systems, what happens to the data, what point does what processing, if any, needs to be happen. So if you have algorithms that need to run we at different stages or at different conditions, all that can be quickly configured in our system. As I said, we provide web portals that are adaptive, so they work on different devices, different screen sizes, so that they're usable across the spectrum of devices that your users may have. Those dashboards provide data visualization widgets, so things like graphs and charts and tabular displays and different kinds of options to kind of view and analyze your data. And access control engines to not only control which patient's information is available to whom, but within that particular record, what information is exposed to different kinds of users. So a very fine-grained access control engine, automated alerts. So if you want to know, or if you want to get an alert if a patient's heart rate goes above a certain level, or some conditional things that happen, you can do automated alerts, whether the email or SMS. Customization of branding. So we sell our software as our solution as kind of a white label. So it essentially you can customize the branding, and it will essentially look like it's your offering and not us. It's just being executed by us. And then if all the systems are not, all these features are not enough, you can always add custom modules or extend the functionality of our system in a way to meet your technical needs. Some of the ways we can help with savings is in terms of cost. So in our analysis, over a 5-year period, you can save up to 73% in your total operating cost, both development and operating costs. So analysis on a mid-tier application, if you build your own initial development versus a 5-year of maintenance, will run you somewhere around $1.3, $1.4 million versus something like us would be about $360,000. So that's kind of a significant saving you can have. And you start with a low outlay, lower monthly payment. So you don't start with a big bolus of money. You start with a low amount of monthly payment that can stretch across your 5-year period. Risk reduction, as I said, we are ISO 13485 certified, run on the QMS, build everything on design controls. We provide all the requisite documentation. If you need to take this, if your cloud becomes part of your filing, we provide everything as well. And we operate under HIPAA, GDPR, and CCPA compliance, which means we put all the controls that are required by those regulatory and laws. And we are fully managed, and we do provide certificate of those compliance. And then we also do audit support. So if you get audited by the FDA or by a notified body, we'll do full support of that audit as far as the cloud is concerned. We are a fully managed solution. We provide service level agreements on things like uptime. So we guarantee uptimes, we guarantee backups, and all that stuff. And we also take up on some of the cybersecurity liabilities. So some of the financial risk that you pay is now put on us to some degree. So that helps us in some of the risk reductions that I was talking about. So to kind of conclude and leave some time for Q&A, connected health is here to stay. We can see that in the current environment. There's more need for remote health, more need for ways to access patients' information remotely. So that's here. Now, there are significant risks to be managed in terms of security, privacy, regulatory, and cost. But the benefits of greater convenience, easier adherence from a patient's perspective, improve insights into what your device is doing versus what the patients are doing, and ultimately better health outcomes, which is what we all want. All that kind of trumps some of the risks we have, and then those risks can be managed. So that's kind of all I had. Hopefully this was useful. I'm going to send it to Keith. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Abbas. That was very insightful and very informative, and I hope our audience got value out of it as well. Before we get to our questions, I would like to announce an exciting webinar next week hosted by the Texas Medical Device Alliance. The title is Next Generation of EHR Medical Device Interoperability, and the webinar focuses on the challenges and opportunities providing interoperability between medical devices and electronic health record systems. We've got a very impressive set of panelists, Neil Simon, who is the COO of EMDs, Sejal Ghoshal, who is the CEO of Cardi.io by Advanced Telesensors, Chris DuPont, the CEO of Galen Data, and Daryl Welk, the CTO of Green Room Technologies. The registration link you will see in the chat window in your GoToWebinar console now. So let's get on to the questions. So you can, again, as a reminder, you can submit your questions in the window in the GoToWebinar console. If we have a lot of questions, we can go long past an hour. And I see there's a lot of questions coming in so far. This is great. Abbas, first question. What are the advantages of the Galen Cloud that you just discussed over more popular products like AWS or Azure? You're muted, Abbas. I think you're...
There are a few differences. So while AWS and Azure kind of provide the basic infrastructure, so they provide your servers, your storage, your compute power, they are still a solution that requires active management. So you have to still build on top of that, and there's some development required to kind of make that all those services that they provide into a single application or a single solution. That building still takes time and money, and then you still have to be compliant on that, and you have to do a lot of validation on that. And when you're still operating it, so you still, making sure the cybersecurity aspects are taken care of, you making sure everything is backed up and all that stuff. So there's still significant, what's a good start, better than keeping your own data centers. There's a significant amount of development and maintenance that needs to happen. With Galen Data's cloud or Galen Cloud, that is much reduced. So you have very little development, if any, and your maintenance is essentially close to zero.
Here's a follow-up question. Nice segue. How secure is the Galen Cloud? What do you have in place to guard against hacking and intrusions? With protection?
So while no one can guarantee intrusion-free solution, we do all the best practices that are out there, both in the IT world and kind of the healthcare aspects. So things like I talked about, having a password management options and available, so you can kind of control what password aspects you have, so that people have limited access to the system. In terms of servers or data, we encrypt everything. So we encrypt everything in transit, encrypted storage. We do a lot of monitoring actively of our infrastructure. So again, things I talked about in the presentation, like log analysis and traffic patterns and everything that we do. We do patches, so regularly patch our stuff. We monitor all the vulnerabilities and patch our systems as soon as we can. So that is kind of active management. There's no silver bullet. It's just we do a lot of the good practices out there.
Abbas, does the Galen Cloud offer two-factor authentication?
Yes, it does.
Very good, very good. Another data question, who owns the data? Can I get a copy of my data?
Sure. So in our business is to provide you with a solution, not to capture your data or sell your data. So you own the data, and you can take a copy of the data at any point in time.
Let's switch gears a little bit and shift to a regulatory and specifically FDA clearance. The question is, we're looking at our 510K submission for our medical device in about 6 months to include connectivity in that submission. How can Galen Data help with our FDA submission?
So a few things, as I said, we are built for FDA. We are built up in design controls. We are built on the QMS. We provide everything that you need for your submission, as long as you use our feature sets. If you do decide to extend that, there is some overhead of making sure those extensions are validated and verified, but generally that's very minimal amount of work. But we will provide you with all the stuff that's needed to file your submission, including documentation, including risk analysis and stuff like that.
Very good. So you may have just answered this, but a follow-on question specifically, what documentation do you provide for an FDA submission?
Whatever is needed. So we generally start with the FDA. If it's in the case of FDA, we start with the off-the-shelf software evaluation guidance, and from that on, whatever falls through is the documentation we'll provide, and we'll provide as much as needed.
And I'll underscore that by saying, the Galen Cloud is developed and maintained under a ISO 13485 certified quality management system. All the processes and documentation that we can provide to our partners for a device history file for their submission to the FDA. So we've got you covered there. Okay, going back to your slide, Abbas, where you're talking about reducing risks. The question is, does Galen Data manage incident response plans for its clients?
So we manage incident response on the cloud side. There's maybe some additional coverage that you may need in addition to our incident responses, but everything on the cloud side we manage. So if there's an incident on the cloud, there's an attack, or there's a breach, we would essentially work with the customers. Obviously, in some cases, we need the customer's help to notify the end users or notify the patients because they may not know us. But all the kind of identification, isolation of that, having the team on our end to fix it and figure out which patients or which users are being impacted. And then and I said, we take some of the liabilities as well in terms of fines and other things.
There's a question, I'm going to make an assumption here. The question is, can we access this framework? I think that's a reference to the NIST cybersecurity framework. Can we access this framework? Please do share the link, or SAS 70-like checklist of documents for third party.
Yeah, so the NIST cybersecurity framework is public. It's managed by the National Institute of Technology. We can definitely send over the link, but it's essentially a public document or a public framework. That's very robust.
So what would somebody Google for that? NIST?
If you just Google NIST cybersecurity framework, you should see that essential framework out there. And there are many tools, a lot of them free tools that are built upon the methodology. The NIST cybersecurity framework has methodology on how to do threat modeling, how to do risk analysis. There are many templates and many tools available out there, a lot of them free that you can use to go in accordance with that framework.
Very good. But for the question asker, we will follow up with you directly and get you that link.
You can definitely send out the links and resources for that.
Here's a good one. I'm curious about interfacing with embedded systems. Can you share any information on how authentication and data transfer works with the API?
Yeah, sure. So the authentication can be done many different ways depending on the need. We can do interactive applications or interactive devices. You can even use user authentication. So user is actually doing the login. We use, behind the scenes, we use that to create essentially tokens, OAuth-based tokens that can be exchanged between systems to do the full authentication. We can also do kind of a master access token option as well, where you have a master token that can request access to the system. The system can provide you with additional tokens for that session. So there's a lot of, I know I'm going into the weeds here, but there's a lot of different ways we can do the authentication with the end customer using our APIs. Will that be an embedded system or not? I think a lot of those will depend on kind of what kind of security in terms of encryption that particular device can support. But we work across different options.
And I think, and the next question also relates, but I'll interject that we're very flexible on our end. The Galen Cloud is built to support a wide range of not just medical devices, but regulatory needs. Whatever our medical device clients need, we have or can provide to them through the Galen Cloud. Here's another similar question. If I am developing a connected, implantable Class 3 PMA device, what are the challenges associated with regulatory approval? Is the connected aspect of the device and cloud system a new PMA?
So I'm not a regulator. I'm not a regulatory expert, so take some of this with a grain of salt, but it doesn't matter whether it's I think eventually it depends on what the cloud is doing. I think again goes back to risk aspects. So the cloud is only being used to, let's say, store some data that's already being collected by the device, then that's a different impact. Versus the cloud is making decisions on that particular device on therapy or on providing guidance on what to do, then that's a whole different aspect. So again, it comes down to risks. There's no one question or one size fits all kind of answer. That will all come down to what is the cloud doing, and that aspect will either be part of your device itself, maybe a separate one. I'm not 100% sure, depending on the situation, it will dictate what to do.
I'm going to combine the next two questions into one because I think you partially answered the second one, but I'll ask it again. I know that currently the Galen Cloud solution is AWS based. Is there a plan for support of other platforms? And then as a follow-on, is there a comparative performance between Galen Data and AWS/Azure that we can see?
Yes, so I mean, right now we are on AWS. Our plans are and to move to a multi-cloud strategy. A lot of this just for risk awareness on our end. We don't want a single vendor issue as well. The services AWS provides a lot more services right now than Azure does or the cloud solution provides, so that's how we challenge a little bit. But in general, our system is designed to be cross-platform or cross-cloud infrastructure. And I saw you did not catch a second part of the question.
Second part, and I think you've already answered this, but we can go over it again. Is there a comparative performance between Galen Data, the Galen Cloud, and AWS/Azure that we can see?
Performance or functional? Functional we can. Performance, and a lot of performance is going to be dependent on what you do with the data and underlying infrastructure issues. So it's kind of hard to give you a performance aspect, but in terms of functional, yes, I just covered those in our previous question.
Well, and that's one of the services we provide. If we engage a medical device company early on, we can help them with that assessment of the different platforms. What are your use cases? What are your, how many devices? What types of data? What cloud processing is going to be expected? And then we can help you make the decision which of those vendors we can put the Galen Cloud on, do the implementation. Here's a good one. Does Galen Data work with, and I'll take the first part of this, Abbas. Does Galen Data work with any EHR systems to provide data or pull data, specifically for patient monitoring devices? That's a very good question, and I will encourage you to attend the webinar next week. We'll send that information out as well. But that webinar will specifically address the issues, the risks, and the benefits of medical device EHR connectivity through the cloud, where it's going to be a 1-2 punch, the current state of the art and where Galen Data is moving that state of the art to with cloud connectivity. But Abbas, if you could just briefly comment on our current plans.
So we as of today, we don't have EHR connectivity. That's something in play that we hope to have in the next few months. An ability to interface with all major EHR providers and be able to push and pull data on a different aspect, so different event or schedule-based push and pull.
And so here's a follow-up to one of the previous questions. As a follow-up, would the API generally support most Wi-Fi microcontrollers transmitting FHIR standard JSON documents?
So let me ask it two parts. One is we don't necessarily, as long as you have Wi-Fi or some kind of internet connectivity, whether it be a Wi-Fi or cellular, that's all we need. We don't necessarily worry about the microcontrollers. Now, one aspect to keep in mind is the encryption aspect. So we do use some encryption algorithms that needs to be supported, so that maybe a decision point there. But in general, in terms of connectivity, all we need is an internet connection. We have our own specification right now for a JSON document. So we use JSON to transmit data. It's not completely FHIR compliant as of right now, but that's what we're working towards as part of our EHR integration work, is to allow that FHIR, full FHIR compliance.
Very good, very good. Next question. Boy, they're just coming in. I'm having trouble keeping up. When developing a new medical device, at what stage in the life cycle should we engage with companies like Galen Data?
So my answer is always as early as you can, because some of the decisions that you make in design can be impacted. If you want cloud connected, we can help you. So even if you don't use our services right away, we can definitely help you with kind of some of the decision making that may be useful if you have cloud connectivity in your roadmap, even if it's 6-9 months out. So I would say if you're thinking about cloud connectivity, do reach out to us and let us help you with at least some due diligence and initial planning. Again, you don't have to use our services right away, but that will help you in making sure that deployment is as seamless as possible.
And that gets to some of the culture of Galen Data, Abbas. You know, the fact that we term our clients customers, but we're really looking for partners. We're looking for medical device companies that we can work with throughout their life cycle and that we learn from. We expand our features, our capabilities by working with companies like that are in the audience right now. Can you talk me through the onboarding process for new customers?
So as you start with initial understanding of the customer or partner needs, so we figure out what the use cases are, what the data that needs to be transmitted, what are the authentication requirements, what are the display requirements. So again, start with the requirements suite. We essentially take that requirements from the company and then do a mapping to our capabilities and find any gaps if there are any, and then figure out how to address that. So that's kind of doing initial due diligence. Once we have all that stuff in place and doing all the other stuff required for business, we work with the engineers. So engineers are all third parties that you have. If you don't have one team in house, to do the actual integration. So that make sure we provide the APIs, provide guidance, provide give them a best case scenarios on certain things, so that they can do the integration of the devices into our cloud, and then we provide support in terms of setting up the displays and then ongoing support as it goes. So again, it's a partnership that goes over a long period of time as long as you use our services.
Abbas, here's one that I'll take. The question is, do you have any materials on your website about EHR interoperability? The answer is yes. If you go to galandata.com and then at the top hit blog or blog articles, you'll see a recent posting of a 3-part series on EHR connectivity and interoperability. It's a very good set of articles, and I think you'll find value in that. How can engineers work more closely with clinicians on new frontiers due to the increased connectivity of data, devices, and patient care? Wow.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think a lot of what comes out, I mean, it's great to have connected devices. It's great to have data, but you can get overwhelmed pretty quickly. So I think one of the things that engineers can do better is to understand kind of how clinicians will use it. What's the workflow for clinicians? How do they capture data? What do they need to assess data? And then use those inputs to kind of provide a solution that benefits them versus just capturing a lot more data and just pushing it their way. They already don't have time. And every time I go to my doctor, they have maybe 5 minutes for me. Adding more complexity or more data to their life doesn't necessarily improve healthcare. It becomes noise. So I think it's very important to understand the workflow, understand the usability aspects, and understand kind of the decision-making process that a clinician would need or a patient would need to interpret that data and provide with the right data at the right time. And that's all. You still need all the data collection, all the management of data, but you still need that final deployment or final kind of delivery of data in a way that makes sense to the end user.
Very good. It all boils down to the standard engineering process, use case analysis. What are the use cases for your device in your setting? Tell me about the scalability of the Galen Cloud, both in terms of how many devices I can connect, the amount of data I can store, and the number of transactions per day. Good.
Sure. So we essentially it's limitless. Having said that, there's always limits on certain things. So we don't necessarily worry too much about how many devices. we do care about how much data because that's our cost or real cost. So our pricing is dependent on amount of data, and we can send out the pricing if there's interest in anybody on how our pricing works. But that's how our pricing works, is based on amount of data. In terms of transactions per day, it's a pretty high limit. We right now have about 100 transactions per second limit per device. So a single device can do 100 transactions a second. So it's pretty high, and most devices would not need that kind of stuff. We don't have any specific limit kind of per day across the entire fleet of device or anything like that.
Here is a business-oriented question. Can Galen data help with creating new revenue streams regarding the sale, the monetization of the data collected?
Sure. I mean, again, depends on what you're trying to do, right? So we don't monetize data on our end, but if it's your data, if you want to, we can definitely provide you with tools and ways to kind of use that data in many different ways. But even without monetizing data externally directly, the data you collect is still value added. It allows you to improve your product, allows you to potentially create different products that may not have thought about, but your data is telling you that there's maybe a need, or there's maybe something that's available already in the market space, but not enough for what you need. So there's different ways to kind of monetize that data. It doesn't have to be selling data, but sure, you can, as long as we can work out a logistic to do that.
How does the Galen Cloud help with opportunities that are very contemporary, with opportunities such as telehealth, telemedicine, and remote patient monitoring?
So again, yeah, I mean, part of all that requires remote collection of data. So right now, if I'm doing a remote telehealth session, I need to maybe collect the vitals of my patient. I need to be able to assess the patient's health in different ways. Having that connected health aspect to your devices helps with those telehealth options. A centralized system allows you to collect data across multiple visits from a single patient, and then do any kind of trend analysis and convey the results back. Having the patient be able to access that data essentially instantly provides some kind of comfort to the patients themselves or to their caregivers, and so stuff like that. So that's where we help in kind of remote patient monitoring by providing you tools to build out either a partial or complete telehealth solution.
Very good. We're almost up on time. We've got a couple more questions. Do you run your own data centers?
No, we use standard infrastructure. We just don't want to be in that kind of business. But yeah, we use AWS right now, and so we are compliant with, or we are agnostic, so we can kind of move on Azure or other infrastructure out there.
Is the Galen Cloud approved or cleared by the FDA?
No, there's no approval potential for Galen Cloud because there's no specific indication of use. You define the indication of use as part of your use of the Galen Cloud. What we do provide is a design history file for the entire solution, so you can use that in your filing. So you don't have to build that, and you don't have to do all the documentation, all the testing, all the maintenance, but the approval is still based on the specific use case you have.
Very good. Probably our last question. How do you work with the hospital when you need to have a local area network as well?
Yeah, so we work with so we don't sell directly to hospitals. We always sell to medical device companies, and if they need to deploy into the hospitals, we work with the hospital security as organizational people to get all the right kind of security in place and have them evaluate our security models, our security practices to provide access to the network. We right now don't have edge solutions, so everything requires to be in the cloud. We are working on potential edge solutions, so things can be locally stored and then synchronized at a later point to the cloud.
Very good. Well, we are through our list of questions, Abbas. I'd like to thank you for your time today. It was very informative, and especially to our audience. I know everybody is busy in these challenging times. We do hope that everybody is staying safe and that we can enjoy better prosperity soon. Please contact us if we can help you with your cloud connectivity needs or anything else that we've talked about on today's webinar. Our contact information is on the screen. We will send out a follow-up email to all attendees with that same contact information. We thank you again for your attendance today. Be on the lookout for more informative webinars in the future. Thank you and goodbye.